Alright guys, TacticalRab back again today. Hope you're all doing well and enjoying your day so far. Plenty of new Rostermania rumours arriving over the last 24 hours or so, but we also have a major confirmation coming through from the Toronto Ultra, locking in their roster for next season. On paper, it's an interesting one. Definitely a high ceiling, potentially a low floor as well if the chemistry doesn't work out. Definitely intrigued your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I'd greatly appreciate it. It really helps out the channel. Thank you very much indeed for doing that one. Plenty to discuss as always today. Let's hop straight into some roster stuff. Firstly from Hydra, no confirmation yet as to what the subliners roster is going to be. We thought that maybe Priest has signed several days ago at this point. Of course, not locked in yet. Maybe Hydra's putting the final touches to his contract or whatever, because other options now seemingly are off the table for him. But this was semi-interesting. The subliners tweeted this out, and then Hydra says, don't know what colour my controller's going to be next year. This one looks pretty nice. So saying that maybe he hasn't exactly locked anything in yet, but we know that he's going to be on the subliners. He's, you know, the golden child of their team, effectively. They want to build around him for years to come, but if they're paying him the amount of money that we expect them to be paying him, then surely they've got to build a roster around him that's actually capable of winning. That, of course, well, many other organizations are trying to do at the present time. This also to say on GodRx, very, of course, well-known name you guys may well know from several years ago. I mean, certainly back in the, well, also Black Ops 4, but also the Modern Warfare season for Minnesota Rokkr. He was a great player for the start of the year. Things didn't go so well for them when it went online, and then GodRx ends up getting dropped, and really since then has had a very difficult time getting back into the league. However, he did tweet yesterday, these two tweets kind of consecutively, one saying team tick as in team secured, and then today has been nothing but perfect. So what exactly does this mean for GodRx? Does this mean that he's got a spot on a challengers team that's either under an organization or something pretty solid, or does it mean that he's actually locked in a spot on a CDL franchise? Now, if the latter is true, I can't really imagine this is on a starting spot anywhere. I imagine it's probably in a bench position, but that could be pretty good. I think that GodRx can actually be a pretty damn good bench player. You know, he can flex to some degree as well, so that's interesting, right? But if he has locked in a bench position, then maybe you would wonder, and if he's also saying his team has been secured, does that mean he's got a good challenger squad? Who really knows? But again, one to keep your eyes on for sure, because guys like GodRx and Kismet and these players, like we've seen the last couple of years, even Brack, for example, on the Florida Mutineers, we imagine he might be joining them. Like, you know, good players from a few years ago, struggled and worked really hard to try and get back into the league, and now maybe getting a chance, and, you know, Kismet did that last year and proved to be incredibly effective on the New York subliner, so I'm sure some of these old school guys can get the job done as well. This from Fellow, though, of course, you know, legendary player for many years. Last season was briefly on the Paris Legion, of course. The season before that was on the Dallas Empire briefly when they dropped Huke and before they got their replacement in Vivid at the end of the season. But as Fellow describes, if anyone's trying to put together a team for challenges this year, let me know. Most likely going to be my last year in the pit. It's a difficult scene for Fellow, really, and it's tough for a lot of these guys because it's really difficult to make like any money and an actual income down there in the challenger side, at least on a consistent basis. So I think Fellow said that, like, you know, doing this, he's tried to, you know, make the commitment pay off effectively, try and grind through challenges, get a starting spot again, get enough money to actually make it worthwhile. But, you know, challenges at the end of the day probably won't be worth it after this season. So Fellow's going to give it one more go effectively to try and make it happen. And who knows who he'll team with? Maybe he could team with Capstol. So we saw the other day, there were some, not exactly leaks, but some hints that were coming out that maybe Capstol was a consideration for the Vegas Legion. Of course, look, we know that Vegas Legion aren't going to lock in their roster anytime soon, but we expected maybe Temp and TJ as the kind of flex SMG duo. They need then like either, well, an aggressive SMG and a main AR, you would theorize, to finish out that roster. We would think maybe Clay, and then the SMG player was a bit of a question mark. We thought that Capstol could be a sensible option, good S&D player, came off the Boston breach last season. They swapped him out for Vivid at the end of the year, which I think was probably the correct move, but I think Cap with some good guidance can still be a very good player and was fantastic in Search and Destroy last year, especially. And also he's unrestricted, right? There's no buyout on him, so Vegas, that might make sense. Turns out though, maybe that's not the case at all. Cap says, need a team for challengers, let me know. So either confirming that he's not going to get a spot on a starting roster, or that maybe Vegas or whoever are just taken so long that, like, look, he wants to lock in a challengers roster, and if he has to leave and he gets a pro opportunity in a couple of months or so, whenever Paris decide to actually lock in their team, then maybe he'll leave and do that. But definitely implying right now that there's probably nothing on the market for Capstol as it stands. It's just crazy the amount of, you know, big name players that probably will be out of a starting spot next season. Of course, you know, there's bigger names out there than Capstol that don't have a spot, but I thought that in terms of the SMG talent we have in the league, Cap could be a good argument for many of the teams, especially some of the teams that haven't yet locked in their full roster. You know, the Florida Mutineers, Vegas Legion, these type of rosters might not be the cases yet though, so one to keep your eyes on as well for sure. And even this from Gunners, right, speaking of other big name players, kind of saying, you know, he hopes everything works out for him, so seemingly as yet no real opportunity arriving, but he does say that he's coming for blood and putting everything on the line if he does get the opportunity, so I'm sure he'll get a sub spot somewhere. And knowing the kind of the ambition of a lot of these rosters that maybe won't deliver on that, then maybe Gunners in a starting team, you know, 3 months into the season is actually a realistic possibility, depending on the organization that he joins. And we'll see one more team that were locked in their roster in just a couple of minutes here. Now, firstly, just to mention, this is Breaking Point put out kind of like well, a graphic to represent what the teams are presently playing at. Lots of these teams already, of course, locked in. The ones with the kind of solid, like well, color in the background are players that have now been locked into their team, and of course the rest of it is kind of just guesses and theories. Paris, we reckon maybe Venom could be there as the SMG, even though this was a team of 4 that was rumoured a couple of weeks ago now, so things could arguably have changed rather significantly. But indeed, just last night after this went out, the Toronto Ultra squad indeed got confirmed for next season. I'm not sure if Hixie has necessarily been confirmed as their substitute quite yet, but we imagine that will be the case as well, with Standy now joining the starting team. So this is the roster for next year, as we guessed it might be, but still definitely a really interesting one to dive into here. They let Cammy go, they let Bance go, both of those go to the Minnesota Rokkr. They get Standy in return, although Standy was an unrestricted free agent, so in terms of where the money has gone, Minnesota have spent more money here than Toronto have to try and upgrade their roster. But on paper, this can be really good if it works out. Now, it also can be pretty bad if they make a change, I think. Now, pretty bad, I think, for this team is probably top 8. I can't see this team being worse than top 8. I think they're pretty much a lock to make the World Championship, I would say. But I think at their ceiling, what's going to be? Maybe top 3, I think, probably is their ceiling of this roster. I expect them to fall somewhere in between. But let's dive into it. CleanX stays his 4th year on this franchise in a row. Understandably, the player they want to build around. Incredibly difficult to find an aggro SMG that's as impactful as CleanX. And the chemistry that he has with Insight, like those two go way back, makes perfect sense. CleanX the entry SMG, Insight as the main AR, like that's perfect. I think Toronto will continue to build around that duo for quite some time, unless, like, well, we'll see what happens with Scrappy, right? I think Scrappy is an incredibly exciting prospect. Whether they made a mistake to drop Cammy, like, it still feels to me it's a bit of a risk, right? Getting rid of Cammy is a risk, but they had to give Scrappy the chance. This guy's been undeniable in challenges the last season, been destroying everyone. Such an exciting personality as well to have in the league. Like, this guy isn't afraid to talk trash on absolutely anybody, right? And he's going to be coming for blood next season, there's no doubt about it. We'll see that from him here in a second. So Scrappy as that player instead of Cammy on the team, it's certainly interesting. But Scrappy, the entire intention of the Toronto Ultra Academy, I suppose, was to find players like Scrappy. They did that, and I was like, well, you can't exactly not give him a spot in your starting roster. So they let go of Cammy, which might prove to be a mistake, but I think that letting Scrappy in is probably what's going to happen. And then they needed to find like a slaying SMG player. And I do think Standy was probably the best option they could have gone for. I do think this does carry risk though, because last year Standy on that Minnesota Rokkr team was not impressive at all, had pretty much a woeful season by his Cold War standards, but his Cold War numbers, we'll see here in a second, were phenomenal. So if Standy can replicate his Cold War season, this team is really scary. But we know that when judging a team, the SMG duo is often the most important factor. CleanX is not going to be a 1.2 SMG, right? This guy's going to be a 0.9, 0.95 SMG that's going to have incredible damage and impact and engagement. Standy needs to be a 1.05 SMG, I think, for this team to actually have really good success. He wasn't doing that last season at all. He needs to do that this year if this team wants to achieve stuff, and if he can't, then I wouldn't be surprised if they swap him out for another SMG, because they wanted Afro, right? That was the target for this Toronto team. He got bought out by Minnesota, or effectively got paid more money by Minnesota than maybe Toronto were offering. That was their plan for their kind of Slayer SMG. They've gone for Standy, who I think is probably the best option in that spot on the market, at least in terms of upside, but there is still a risk, right? He definitely says, like, excited to get this team underway. Words can't describe how ready I am for this opportunity. So honestly, I hope that we see a good season from Standy and from Priester. Like, they've been on the Minnesota Rokkr the last couple of seasons. For Priester especially, hasn't really worked out for him. And I do think there's more in the tank for these guys in a slightly different team environment, right? So I'm hoping that we see that, right? And especially this team with Standy can be very good, right? We saw what he was doing in Cold War. It was pretty spectacular. So this is the roster of 4. The other concern I have about this team, because I've got no concern at all about Insight Clinics. We know what they did with that former Toronto team, for example, back in Cold War was their best season with Cammy and Bance. And of course, it's minus Bance plus Standy, minus Cammy plus Scrappy. So I think on paper, like, not too much has changed, apart from the leadership question and the culture question and the chemistry question, which to me is rather significant with this roster. That's the main concern I have, really, if I was a Toronto fan, is that you come in here really thinking, well, previously it was a fully European team. The whole idea, arguably, of getting rid of methods and bringing Insight in back in Cold War was like, like, yeah, we'll get the chemistry there, Insight, ClearNex, like, you know, fully UK European team, like, the vibes are going to be good, there's going to be no kind of chemistry issues, stuff like that, as maybe they developed over time, but certainly in their first season, there were no problems at all. This team, in terms of, like, you know, culture, might be a little bit strange. Scrappy is a rather different personality to, you know, to Insight and ClearNex, and of course, Staddy also, you know, American player. Like, it's kind of rare to see teams that have European guys and American guys actually succeed. We've seen it on occasion, and of course, this season, there's quite a lot of rosters forming that are just like that, right? Obviously, Minnesota Rokkr are trying the same thing with the Attach plus 3 European guys, but I feel like I have more kind of, you know, optimism about Attach plus 3 European guys working as a team culture rather than kind of 2 NA, 2 EU. It could be a little bit strange, right? Like, it's tough to say, and maybe they get on fine, but Scrappy is just like that personality that he could be kind of abrasive, right? On paper, he's going to be a nasty player, and I think he will kind of deliver on that kind of expectation, right? We even see him saying right here, rookie year, better be a bang, takeover starts now. So he's, you know, bigging himself up. He's expecting him to absolutely deliver the goods here. And if he does think he's really that guy, and, you know, he's turning up, and maybe his teammates he thinks are letting him down, then what does that mean for the team? Like, obviously he's a young guy. He's going to be talking trash, and if his team isn't delivering, like, what does that mean internally, right? Is he going to start blaming his teammates? Is he going to start flaming his teammates? Like, you know, how much respect does he have for these guys if things start to go wrong? Also, how much respect does he have for whatever coaching staff they have as a roster? Like, that I think is one of the key points to me. Like, if Marky B stays, I've got more confidence here, kind of like the Crowder thing on FaZe, to be honest, with Slasher coming in. But if there's no Marky B and he leaves to another team and they don't get like a better or even equal replacement coach, then I think you've got to be somewhat concerned about the potential chemistry fit of Scrappy in this roster. Now, look, I think that they will probably try and work it out, because in the long term, Insight, Scrappy, ClearNex plus an SMG, if Stanley works, if Stanley doesn't work, that's a nasty trio, plus the slaying SMG that Stanley might prove to be, might not prove to be. But I think they've probably got to try and work it out with Scrappy in the same way that they managed to make it work with Cammy, and you know, I'm pretty confident it can work, but I definitely think there is some risk to it. And this was Stanley's numbers in Cold War, for example, right? This guy was disgusting when he came into the Minnesota Rokkr that year. Like, these numbers across the game modes were phenomenal. This season, nowhere near the same level at all from Stanley. So this is the Stanley that Toronto needs, and if they don't get him, I wouldn't be surprised if they consider a certain upgrades as the season progresses. But I do think for now he was their most sensible option, keeping Hixie on the bench for now, as it seems like it's going to be. Simp says, look, good luck this year, brother. So what is the potential of this roster? I would say that at its ceiling, like, there's a lot of good teams right now. You've got OpTic, you've got FaZe, you've got Thieves, Seattle, like, they've all stuck together. Minnesota, I think, are probably maybe a marginally better team than this one on paper. At least I would expect Minnesota to be better than this team, just because I think Minnesota's roster has slightly less risk than this one, but I do think that this roster maybe even has a higher ceiling potentially if everything clicks and works well. So, I mean, yeah, it's interesting. I think probably top 3 at peak, and then probably top 8 at worst. Like, I think it's got quite a large range in what this team could potentially deliver next season, and I think there's some risk involved. But I think Toronto are wise to take that risk, because if you don't take a risk with the roster and say, look, we're going to put Scrappy in, we know this guy might be undeniable, we know that it might cause chemistry issues, but we're going to try and work through it. If it does, then I think that's the way to try and build a roster which actually is capable of winning events, because you've got to sack the talent nowadays in the league if you actually want to win something. And on paper, it's pretty nice, and Simp obviously knows he's had good battles with Toronto boys the last couple of seasons, and maybe that will continue. Was it a mistake to get rid of Cammy? I think that's still a question that will be raised. Of course, they let him go to the Minnesota Rokkr. That rivalry is going to be great, right? Of course, we've seen what Minnesota Rokkr have done, bringing Afro in that Toronto wanted, getting Cammy and Bance off that team. Stanley's gone the other way. So, like, you know, it's going to be a great and exciting rivalry going forwards. And, you know, Cammy is one of the key players to deliver, right? Stanley's got to deliver for Toronto, and Cammy's got to deliver really for the Minnesota Rokkr. So, exciting prospect going forwards. But as I say, usually it's the SMG duo that is the key piece of the team. And Insight and Scrappy can be as good as they are and as good as they have been in Search and Destroy and the other game modes. Like, that's great. But if your SMGs aren't firing on all cylinders and Stanley isn't delivering what they need him to deliver, then this team will never reach its potential ceiling. So I wouldn't be surprised if they keep cycling through SMGs if Stanley doesn't work out until they find a player that can deliver on what they want. Couple of things just to mention before we close out the video. This firstly from Proloot, rookie year bound to be a bang, he says as well. So interesting stuff really from Proloot, since deleted, maybe implying, because Proloot of course came in last season, I guess as a rookie maybe for OpTic, but like if he comes back this season on a starting roster or something, then he could be in position. So who knows what's going to happen here. Tough to say where Proloot could be. I do think he would be a sensible substitute for many teams, but one to keep your eyes on most certainly as we go forwards. And just to say this, speaking of the subladders before we close out the video as well, with Hydra needing to get Kismet on that Valorant grind if they want their team chemistry to build up as successfully as it could do. Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comment section below. So, hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did enjoy it, hit the like button, tell the YouTube gods this is a good video. Others like you should see it as well, and help grow the competitive Call of Duty community. Thank you for watching as always, take care, and I'll see you next time.